Hello, and welcome to another Behind the Green Screen episode. As you can see, there's no green screen behind me. And actually, I may want to, I don't know, maybe rethink retitling this episode or this series because I took a break. It wasn't an intentional break, but I just fell behind in my writing. And so it's been a good 3 weeks since my last OG Fact Checker episode. So I figured with such a break, let me come back to it and let me try something new, try different lighting, try it without the green screen because the green screen is hassle for me because the first green screen that I got does not cover this lens at all. Like you can see the outer edges of the green screen because it's round and it sits on the back of this chair. So to make up for the fact that that green screen doesn't significantly cover, I have to put another green screen. And then I'm fussing around with lighting and stuff like that. And then that's when it gets to be a chore. Now I can set something up permanently so I don't have to fuss as much as I do, but I just don't want to do that. I don't want to set something up because I use my off. I don't this is my office, so I can't have a permanent setup in my office because I have to take it down. I can't let it sit. I can't let it stay. So there's the dealio with that, right? So yeah, so I've just had to do a lot of writing lately. I fell behind, and then for the OG episode that to get me all caught up, that took me longer than I had really intended it to. And I had bought a book that gave me excellent, it was like an excellent biography on Romare Bearden. And but going through it, it took me longer. It was a it was written by the I think either the current president or the former president of Spelman College. I think it's the former president. And so it's a very um academic book. It's a little bit dense. So it took me a while to get through and to pull out what I needed to pull out from my episode. So that took me longer. And then, other things, life just got in the way. That's the only way to say it. And I was in this mood and I didn't feel like putting on makeup and I didn't feel like sitting in front of the camera and anything like that. And then sort of just recently, I've had to be in front of the camera for an interview. And I thought, okay, that was a nice warm up. Now it's time to get back on track with these episodes. And so that's that's what's happening here. So yeah. So for the OG fact checker episode, I'm going to try to do it without the green screen, without all that hassle, but just do different lighting. Make sense? So to differentiate, kind of, sort of. I'll figure it out because there is a way for me to go into Adobe Premiere Pro. Yeah, there's a trick to change this background, and I could do that without having to do a green screen, but I think I have the video. I'm going to find it and see what I can do. Because that may be sort of my way of still using a green screen and having different backgrounds because I do like my backgrounds. Okay, so for this episode, no nasty stuff. I don't know why this thing keeps drifting. It drives me nuts. Okay. So yeah, no sex talk. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about you know what, let me oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'm not going to get into any sex talk. No sex books. As a matter of fact, it's going to be really chill for this episode as I go through some of the books that are in my collection regarding this particular subject. But before I get started, I want to announce that I finally got a new bookcase, right? It arrived this morning. Thank you, IKEA. I put that bad boy together in like an hour. And I don't know if you can see now, see how lighter it is. Yeah, I've been moving my books over, right? See over here, it's a little bit lighter. And you can see that I'm starting my collage work, right? Yeah, I was so like really researching Romare Bearden and what goes into collage work. It sort of inspired me to try it myself. So that's a piece that I'm working on right now, but I digress. So yeah, so I got a new bookcase, and so I'm moving books around. And I had once there was. Let me back up a second. So I was I had a particular idea in mind for this episode, but then something made me sort of like change my mind a little bit. And so what I want to talk about is, and I'm not going to take too long with this, only because it's getting late and I'm hungry. I want to eat. Okay, so let me start this episode off with a story, like I always do. Picture it. It's the mid 90s, and there is one show, two shows actually. They were back to back, and they were extremely popular. The show went on for like 4 or 5 seasons, and it was on one of those syndicated channels like the CW. I can't remember what it was called back then, but it evolved into the CW. So there was these two syndicated shows that were filmed and produced in Australia or New Zealand. And you probably know, I did say New Zealand, right? Yeah, New Zealand. And you probably know where I'm going with this. It was Hercules, which showed on Saturdays at 8 o'clock. And then what followed it, and this is what I'm going to talk about. Yeah, you know it. Xena, the warrior princess, with the lovely Amazon that is Lucy Lawless, who broke a couple of bones for that show, as well as other stunt work. But I, a neighbor of mine, well, she wasn't really like next door, but she was on the property, like where we were living. She and I watched that show. We were hooked on that show. Not so much Hercules, Kevin Sorbo, whatever, but Lucy Lawless and her sidekick, right? So it was Lucy Lawless, and forgive me, I do not remember the name of the actress who played her sidekick, but the sidekick's name was Gabrielle. And she was like this bubbly, just always looking on the bright side of life and always keeping Xena in check. And check this out though. So that show was really popular among lesbians. And I did not know this. Like, oh, I'm covering the mic. I really did not know this. That was like above my head. But I could understand why it was so big with females, with lesbians, because it was Xena and Gabrielle, and they traveled together everywhere, and they had each other's back, and they loved each other. And as a matter of fact, what really sort of I think was like just put the nail on it all for why it was so attractive to lesbians was that there was this one episode, and this is the episode that's really going to lead to what I'm going to discuss tonight. So, in this episode, Xena dies. It was either Xena or Gabrielle who dies. I want to say it was Gabrielle. And in that episode, they kiss. And this was and this was not just like a mwah. This was like a mwah, right? So that's what you can understand. Like, and it was hard to say whether they were sort of catering to their audience by doing that, or if that was just kind of part of the storyline. In any event, what is important about the episode and pertains to what I'm going to talk about tonight is that in that episode, I think it was Xena. Xena dies, right? And Gabrielle does something and sort of brings her back or something, but I cannot remember and believe it or not, I bought like a couple of seasons of Xena the Warrior Princess on Apple, and I must rewatch it because I rarely watch anything that I've bought on Apple. But in that episode, Xena comes back, and it's all about reincarnation. And that was the first time that I had heard about the concept of reincarnation. And so, me being the curious individual that you know that I am, I start looking it up, like trying to understand this thing. And as I'm trying to understand reincarnation, that's how I fall into the first book that I'm going to talk about. Because I start sort of trying to find out more about Hinduism. And as I'm researching and trying to understand reincarnation, this concept of karma and past lives and past experiences and things of that nature, I come across the Bhagavad Gita, which is an epic poem. And I'm just going to read the back of it because there's a reason why I don't remember a whole lot of it, because it was years ago that I bought this book. Again, I bought this book in the mid 1990s after researching more about Hinduism and this complex concept of reincarnation and finding that the Bhagavad Gita sort of fits into the Vedas or scripture of Brahman. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So the Bhagavad Gita, like I said, is an epic poem. And the dialogue, which takes place on the eve of a historic battle, probes the nature of God and what man should do to reach him. As the Bhagavad Gita unfolds, this majestic poem provides a fascinating synopsis of the religion, thought, and experience of India through the ages. So this is basically sort of like it's framed in the context of this discussion, and it sort of brings into different aspects or the different things that make up Hinduism under Brahmin scripture and under Brahmins, and how it basically sort of says to you, okay, listen, when we go throughout life and there are things that we do, with every action that we do, we build up karma. And I don't want to simplify it like my name is Earl kind of thing. I don't want to do that. But karma is about the accumulation of actions and how they play a role in your next life. So in Hinduism, I don't want to say it's loosey goosey, but it's more forgiving. There's no heaven, there's no hell, hence reincarnation. Okay, there is, you build up through your actions, how you treat others, what you do in your family structure, how you act as a wife, as a husband, as a brother, as a sister. All of these actions sort of build up throughout your lifetime. And if you are contributing in a positive way to the universe, you will be rewarded. If you're not, you are building up this bad level of ill will that's going to work against you, not only in this life, but in the next life. Excuse me. That's how hungry I am. I'm starting to burp. So basically, it's about, I like to explain, I used to explain it to my students as, think of reincarnation as this, well, excuse me. Think of your actions as putting pennies into a karma piggy bank. And you have two piggy banks. You have your good karma piggy bank and your bad karma piggy bank. And the more, if you put more into your good karma piggy bank, you'll be rewarded in this life. And when it comes time to reincarnate, you will be rewarded in the next life if you come back, if you have to come back. If you keep putting bad actions into that bad karma piggy bank, not only will you suffer in this life, you will suffer in the next. You might even come back as a cockroach in the next life. All right. So it's all about reward. It's totally. But here's the thing. So people will say, well, basically, you're being good so that you come back in a next life. But here's the thing, right? And Aristotle talks about this, and I will get into Aristotle really briefly in a moment. But Aristotle believed that when it comes to habits, the more you do something, the more it becomes habit to the point that you don't even think about doing it. So one could argue that people are doing good because they don't want to come back as a cockroach in the next life, and they don't want any, difficulties in this one. But I would say if we look at Aristotle, Aristotle would say, well, if that person, even if that person was doing it so that they would have a better life in this one and the next, the fact is that they've done it, these good deeds and these good actions, so much so that it becomes habit, and you don't even think about it anymore. You just do it. So you're kind of like automatically building up that good pennies in that good karma piggy bank, right? And conversely, the same thing for the bad or negative piggies, pennies in the negative karma piggy bank, right? The more ratchet stuff you do, the more you add to that bad piggy bank karma, the more difficulty you will have in this life and in the next, right? And all the things that you felt like you would want, but you never got, but you hope to get them in another life. If you've been doing all kinds of ratchet stuff, you're not going to get anything of what you think you deserve. Right. And the thing is that you have to learn from your previous lives, because the whole point, like, when it comes to reincarnation, it's not just you're reincarnating over and over and over and over and over. There is an end game. And that end game happens when you achieve enlightenment, when you open up the third eye, when you open up the crown of your head with all that, when you go yoga and meditation, you're unblocking chakras. If you've ever heard of chakras, we have all kinds of chakras throughout that body. And if you've ever watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, they explain chakras perfectly, simply, because that's a children's cartoon. So if you want to learn more about chakras and how they work when it comes to meditation, I recommend, now I cannot remember, I know it's in season 2 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the cartoon that was on Nickelodeon. I want to say it's episode 13 or something like that. It's later on in the episode. It's right before the season, a couple of episodes before the season ends, and explains chakras very well. But when it comes to chakra, there's a third eye. I know you've heard of the third eye. And then there's the crown of the head. So when you achieve enlightenment, basically, like, you've opened up the crown chakra, you've opened up the eye chakra so that you can receive all that the universe has to give you. And when that happens, you get absorbed into the universe and you reincarnate no more. So learning about all of this just blew my mind. And I started thinking, like, am I a good person? Like, do I navigate this world considering my fellow man, person, child? Like, am I a good person overall? Do I inflict evil? Like, I started to have all these conversations with myself, and also about, like, improving my character and my worth, my self-worth. Because at that moment when I was learning about all of this, I was in my mid 30s, and I was kind of going through a really bad crisis because I was a single mom, and I was felt lonely a lot of the time. And I was beginning to think, like, okay, so, I wanted to be in a relationship. I wanted to meet someone, and I was beginning to feel like, what am I doing wrong? So maybe, let me start working on myself a little bit. Let me start finding a way, just not with any particular idea in mind. Let me just open myself up to new things. Hence the Bhagavad Gita. Now, the reason why I don't remember too much of this is that, number one, I was reading this in the mid 90s and I haven't picked it up since, shame to say. And second, how can I? The when I bought this book, my kids were small. And there was a place that I used to take my kids to that I had discovered when I was in the Navy, because all of us as a command, we one time went there to camp, stay overnight, and then the next morning we went up and went fishing because there was good catfish at Hopeville Pond, at least at the time that we were there. And so I used to take the boys there because they could swim. It's a pond, but they would have it, like, don't go too far out. They had it sectioned off so that there was only a particular area that you were allowed to stay in. And I felt that it was safe enough for the boys to go. And so I would take them and I would bring my special chair. And I remember this was during the summer. Oh no, this is not going to be a bad memory. This is going to be just a beautiful memory. I remember I had brought the Bhagavad Gita with me, and there are large arborvitae trees at Hopeville Pond, and I was sitting under one of those large arborvitae. And while the boys were out there splashing around and swimming, I was reading this book. And it was warm, it was hot, but not too hot. And there was a breeze that just came out of nowhere as I was reading a particular section of this book. And I lost my train of thought because of that. Sorry, guys. And I lost my train of thought because I know this is going to sound really hokey, but it's how I feel. I felt it one with the universe that day. Okay. I was reading this book, absorbing this knowledge. It's beautiful. It's sunny. I brought my favorite chair. The boys are enjoying themselves. I even brought snacks and food, whatever, because there's no food stand there. There's no, there's no place to buy food there, no vendors. And it was just a beautiful day. And that's why I don't remember what I read, because I remember the feeling that I had while I was reading it rather than the words themselves. And so when I pick up this book, I know that I should read it again, and I will. But it's just that beautiful moment when I just closed my eyes and just felt this breeze just come over me. And it was just the most beautiful thing that I had ever experienced. And I truly felt like change was possible. If I was seeking change within myself, I felt that change was possible from that moment. Okay. All right. So I'm learning about reincarnation. I'm learning about Hinduism. I'm learning about the roles that throughout your lifetime that you will play. And some roles will stay with you and other roles will drop off. Like, for example, sometimes you play the role of daughter, but you're not always going to be a daughter for me because when your parent passes away, you're nobody's daughter, right? So there's that aspect of it. Um, I play the role of mother. That's a role that will always be a part of me. It will never go away until, well, when my eyes close permanently. That's when I'll stop being a mother, right? And so there's all these roles that you're learning about throughout your lifetime. And one of the interesting things about Hinduism is that it's okay to be rich. There's no sin in being prosperous. If you are prosperous, that means in Hinduism that you're doing all the right things, that you're praying, that you're treating your fellow man well, you're doing all the things. And because of that, you're prosperous. And so if you're prosperous, that means that you should be giving back, right? So I guess you can call it tithing, but that's how you show your appreciation for what has been bestowed upon you is by all that money that you're making donating to charitable causes. Donating your time at soup kitchens, like doing all of these things are good for the soul. They make you a better person. And if you do it enough times, it becomes a part of you in which you don't even think. And so this is what I have been working on for the longest. I really, from the moment I picked up this book, I was working on making myself a better person and getting to the point that I don't have to think about doing good. I just do it. And if you're asking me that question, Lisa, did you get to that point? Yes, I did. Yes, I did get to that point. I'm proud to say that I do. Like, it's to the point now that, for example, one time I was in the supermarket, and this was before I moved down here. I was in the supermarket, and I used to get bottled water, the 24 packs of water, because we didn't have a filter on the faucet. So I was in that aisle and I had just reached for my 24 pack of bottled water when I noticed an older woman standing in the aisle. She was just staring at the water. And I automatically said, ma'am, do you need me to lift one of these waters for you? And she's, oh, no, 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 thank you. I'm just like trying to decide which one I want. But that's what I mean when when I say doing it without even thinking about it. There was no hesitation. The minute I saw her and I knew that these bottles of water were really heavy, and I just automatically just spoke up. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think, well, she's good. She's good to go. She doesn't need my help. I didn't think that way. And so sometimes it pisses me off when people don't do that. And it really irritates me that people sometimes can't go the extra mile or think outside of themselves to do stuff that can benefit someone else. And we can argue whether it's truly altruistic, because that is, there's this discussion of whether people are really altruistic, meaning that they give freely of themselves. Because are the argument could be made that if they are doing all of these things so they can feel good about themselves, then it's not really being altruistic, because that comes with doing it without seeking a good feeling or boosting their self-esteem, right? You should just do it just to do it. But then there's the other argument that says, well, why shouldn't I feel good about doing a good deed? Isn't that what it's all about? That feeling, uh, um, that fuzzy tingling sensation that you get in the back of your neck when you've done something really that makes someone else so appreciative and so happy. You want that feeling, right? And is it wrong to seek that feeling like a junkie? If it makes the world better, no. It's that simple. Okay, so I'm still studying, and I start teaching. And when you're teaching college writing, it is one of the most difficult things to do next to teaching math because students have to test into English and math, right? And depending on how well they test, either it's through SATs or ACTs or any of those standardized tests, right? Um, I forgot my train of thought. What was it? Oh, right. So, teaching English, right. So you often, so what happens, and I don't know if this is a change or not, but when I was teaching, this is what happened. And especially at the community college level. If you didn't take the ACT or the SAT and you want to get into college and you want to start slow, you want to go to the community college first. What happens is that if you don't have any ACT or SAT scores, the college, will give you a test to take. And based on how you score, will determine where they put you in math and English. Now, there were students in my class who didn't test all that well. So what happens is that you can ask for, um, I forgot the name of it, but you can essentially take a written test. Like they give you a writing prompt and you have to write an essay, Johnny on the spot. And based on how you write that essay, they will score you whether you need to go mainstream or whether you need to go remedial. So oftentimes I would get these students who tested in with by taking um, that placement test, the writing prompt with the essay. But when they get into my class, performance is a different thing. It's I find like I wind up remediating them anyway. So you have students that don't like writing or think they can't write. And, and 9 times out of 10, it's what's going on in their head. If you think you can't write, then you're not going to be able to write. It's that simple. But if you put some effort into it and you seek help, then I'm not going to say you're going to become the greatest writer, but you will feel a little bit more confident when you sit down and you have to put thoughts to paper. So, in order to make these classes interesting, I started incorporating um, movies and books to sort of meet the theme, which is called, for me, the banality of evil. And I don't know why this is drifting again. Stop. Right? So, I had put together this course called The Banality of Evil. And what I would do is I would discuss Hinduism, and I put together PowerPoint presentations, and I would have them read a book and then apply what they were learning about Hinduism to what they were reading in their essays. And they liked it for the most part. They did. They didn't know what to expect, but they liked, the fact that I was thinking outside the box and not having them read like really dense literature. It wasn't a English literature or a British literature class. It was a writing class. The goal is to get you to write, and I have to try to make you a better writer in 15 weeks. So, as I'm learning Hinduism, I also start learning about Buddhism. And in researching Buddhism, this book came highly recommended, The Heart of Buddha's Teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I know I'm not saying that correctly. He passed away a couple of years ago. I want to say before the pandemic, he passed away. And so I got this book and I started reading and I started learning about Buddhism. And okay, so I'm not going to compare Buddhism and Hinduism. That would be unfair. Whereas Hinduism is all about um, bringing about good karma and doing right and proper by the universe, with Buddhism is about suffering. We are all suffering, especially right now, right? We are all suffering. So we need to acknowledge that there's suffering and sort of figure out the root of the suffering. Then once we figure out the root, we have to start putting certain practices in motion that's going to minimize and eventually eliminate that suffering. And so that's basically what Buddhism is about approaching. It's sort of it's not it yes, they have religious practices with it. There's the gong and the incense, like that's the religious worship aspect of it. But on the non-religious part of it, it's a philosophy. And it's about self-diagnosing your pain and suffering and doing what you can to minimize or eliminate that suffering. If you don't recognize what's wrong, you're going to continue to suffer. And you're deluding yourself into thinking that you're not suffering, because everybody is suffering in some way, shape, or form. And when you are constant denial of it, it only makes life more arduous for you. So I'm not going to get too much into it because I don't want to get too lost in the sauce with this. But there's one aspect of this philosophy, religion that really struck me. And it was something that I added on to what I was learning from here and sort of creating my own religion. I talked about this. As a matter of fact, I should get the book, but I haven't read the book, which is why I'm not introducing it. These books I've read. Create Your Own Religion. I have not read it yet. But I was essentially doing what that book was suggesting, which is taking pieces that you can use not that you can use, but yeah, pieces that you can use, things that appeal to you, things that make sense to you, and sort of build your own religion. So I take aspects of the Bhagavad Gita and Hinduism, along with certain aspects of Buddhism. And one of those aspects of sort of eliminating suffering is following the 8 elements or the eightfold path. And that eightfold path, as you can see through this diagram, talks about right mindfulness, right concentration, right view, right thinking, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and right diligence. Right? I mean, I can explain them, but if you just listen, then you kind of already know what Hinduism is saying to you, right? Right concentration means focusing on the right things at the right time, not to get distracted. Right view is having a certain look or focus, not having a narrow view, but widening your area to sort of, you know, not just take one side of things, but look at the entirety of it, of whatever the situation is. Right thinking, of course, that means, that falls in line with right action. Okay. Your thoughts come forth in your deeds. Your deeds sort of show the type of person you are more than anything else. I'm sure you've heard plenty of proverbs about this, but your actions speak to your character more than your words ever will. But you should also mind your words. You should have thought about your words and your actions, because once they're out there, you cannot take them back. Okay. So I started incorporating Buddhism into my teaching. And so I would put together these really short PowerPoint presentations. I would say, I would talk about certain aspects of Hinduism and Buddhism. And then we would discuss it in class so that they understood the concept. And then I would, in their assignments, they would take these principles, teachings, and apply it to the action of the characters of the book that I assigned to them. And I mentioned before, I would, use Stephen King. I think the first time I actually started teaching the next philosopher I'm going to talk about, it wasn't with a Stephen King book, but it was a good book nonetheless, because it was a movie and the movie had Meryl Streep, but I'm getting ahead of myself. All right. So fast forward and 2 years later, and it's 2014, and I want to shake things up a bit in my teaching. And I don't know how I came across this book. I had to have just been like looking on Amazon because I know that's where I bought it. So I knew about Aristotle, but not too much about it. And so I started my own study, and it started with this book. Now, if you remember from my episode titled I Love Sweet, Sweet Music, I showed you another one of these pocket books that was from Music Theory 101. But it all started with this one, Philosophy 101. I got this book. No, it wasn't on Amazon. It was in one of my bargain books at, you guessed it, Barnes and Noble. That's where I found it. Yes, that's where I found it. And I picked it up. Again, I read the few pages, I vetted it, and I said, yes, let me take this home and read this. And as I started reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Mind blown. Where has all this information been my entire life? So, one of the things that came up in Xena the Warrior Princess episode was determination versus fatalism. Like, now, let me see if I have this. So, there's determinism and there's fatalism. So, determinism, um, so I'll read it from here rather than me trying to explain it, because it explains it pretty well here in the book. So determinism, or hard determinism, is the philosophical theory that because every event has a cause, all human action is predetermined, and therefore choices made by free will do not exist. Basically, it's just saying we have no free will because everything is determined beforehand. If you know your Greek mythology, there were the three sisters, the three fates, and they were the ones that basically determined how long you would live, things of that nature. One wove the line of your life. One measured it, and then one cut it. And so, so hard determinism basically says, you know what, like, you do what you want because this was probably predetermined anyway. Whatever it is you're doing now was already predetermined for you, right? But then you get into the opposite, in which we talk about fate. And, like like fate and determinism are sort of like the same thing, because like if you're meeting your fate, that means everything was already decided for you and that there's really no way. Like whatever change you make is because it was already predetermined that you made that change. So therefore there is no free will. And I do not believe that at all. I think we do have free will. We are free to do whatever we want. However, we are restrained by society. And society basically has this social contract that we can all agree that being good means that you do this, you do these things. And by doing this, you're showing that you're not selfish at all, because selfishness has never, ever been valued as a wonderful trait for human beings to have. Never. So we can all agree that selfishness has never been valued as something that we should all have or do, right? So we have this understanding. So because we have this understanding of what's good and bad, we can argue that there is no free will, because whatever we do is dictated by the approval of society. I know it. I'm. I know I'm getting lost in the sauce, but let me move on before I start lecturing. So this book started introducing me to all these groovy philosophers. One is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Oh, you got to see his picture. He was hot. He was Swiss, and he sort of brings up the idea of compassion or pitié, and how we really need to get back to compassion and empathy. Otherwise, we will completely de-evolve as a society. And Thomas Hobbes, who was basically, when Rousseau wrote what he wrote, he was basically responding to the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. And Thomas Hobbes was a very sour, pessimistic so-and-so who had absolutely no faith in humans whatsoever. And he argued that we need heavy government in our lives because human beings are base, they're lazy, they're selfish, they're rude, and they will take you out without a minute's hesitation if you jeopardize something that they want. Think about that for a second, right? This is what Thomas Hobbes is saying, that human race is rude, crude, mean, and selfish, and that if any person, and this is Thomas Hobbes saying this, Thomas Hobbes says that if your life is in jeopardy, if you feel your life is being threatened, you have a right to defend your way at any means necessary. And if that means killing that other person to protect yourself, it is completely justifiable and understandable. But Jean-Jacques Rousseau was like, see, that's the problem right there. That's the problem. That's why we got no compassion, why we got no empathy, because people are selfish, rude, mean, nasty, and lazy. Okay? Okay. So, other philosophers that I discovered and I started incorporating into my teaching, seriously, I would put together these lecture videos. I wrote scripts and I put them together using Camtasia for Mac. I'm a Mac head, just so you know, I'm a Mac head. So I started putting together all of my lectures of philosophers that I wanted to talk about, and I got them all from this book. So the next one that I got was John Stuart Mill, another philosopher, and his thing was utilitarianism. And his philosophy was in direct contrast to, let me see if he's here. He's not immediately. So John Stuart Mill was, and his utilitarianism, yeah, okay, you're going to make me do this, was in contrast to Immanuel Kant's The Categorical Imperative, which is in here, by the way. That's how I learned about the categorical imperative. Now, let me see if I can find it. Where are you? Kant. And a student, actually, I learned about the name Immanuel Kant from a student that I was teaching when I was at the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. And this one student, his name is Carter Schlank, and he is a helicopter pilot for the Coast Guard now. I don't know if he's still doing it. But he gave me the joke, you can't understand Kant. So 82. So back up a second. So utilitarianism is the exact opposite of Immanuel Kant's the categorical imperative. Immanuel Kant's the categorical imperative basically states that any action that you undertake should always come from from a strong moral foundation. All right. You should always do the right thing regardless of the outcome. So, what's important is the action, not the consequence. The consequence is the consequence. And as long as you are doing the right thing, whatever happens, happens, and you're not responsible for it. He gives the example of, I think, the axe murderer. I think that's the example in which, say, someone comes to your door and they're looking for someone and they're holding an axe in their hand. It's clear that they want to settle someone's hash with that axe, right? With Immanuel Kant says the right thing to do is to tell the guy at the door with the axe where that person is. You're not to stall the person with the axe. You're not to interfere at all. If the person is asking you, do you know where this person is? And you know where the person is, you should tell the truth, regardless of whether your friend is about to get their wig split. Okay. John Stuart Mill, in utilitarianism, he argues, or his philosophy is that it's okay to lie. If if a large amount of people benefit, it is okay to lie. So if we look at the axe example, if you lied to the axe murderer, you're doing a good thing. Yes, because you're saving that individual. But are you really saving that individual, right? Because you just basically gave that person who's being hunted a stay of execution, right? So that person is going to find them eventually and split their wig eventually. So you really didn't, that was a waste. Lying was a waste, right? And that's why Immanuel Kant says it's always good to tell the truth because your hands are clean regardless because you did what you were supposed to do. You had strong moral fiber, right? And that's what Immanuel Kant says that we should have. We should have a strong moral foundation and we should always act on what is morally right, not what is the best good for the most people, which is what utilitarianism argues, right? So I started getting into all of this, and then the mind body problem, which that comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. And I broke down the mind body problem. And I would have to break it down again to explain it to you because I had it like right here. Like I could explain it without having to dip to any type of materials. But because it's been a minute since I taught all of that, I would have to dip back into the mind body problem. And if I wanted to give that lecture to you, which I don't, that's what I would have to do it. But so I started learning about Aristotle, and from learning about Aristotle came my desire to understand the moral lessons that Aristotle basically put together. Now, we need to give Aristotle credit where credit's due, because what people don't understand is that our form of justice, our justice system, and how people work within it comes from Aristotle and how he believes people should argue. Aristotle says, and this is something different. This was in posterior analytics, is where he talks about how people should argue. I think it's posterior analytics or it's something, another one of his books. But basically, Aristotle says that when you want to prove a point, you need evidence. All right. You need to present facts. You can't just say, this is the way it is, because the people says it is. Like, you can't use emotion to prove your point. You have to use facts to prove what you're trying to prove. All right. So that's one aspect of Aristotle that I was teaching my students, especially when it came to their writing, because I had to really change their perception of writing. Because what everybody, and I hope if you're watching this and understand this, writing is about persuasion. That's it. It's about persuading a reader. The more tighter your writing an argument is, the more the readers are apt to believe it and even practice it in the case of religion or philosophy. Now, I'm going to burst your bubble a little bit. Before there was religion, there was philosophy. And the person who married philosophy and religion is not St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas kind of kicked it off, but the one who really sort of took care of it, what is his name? There was St. Thomas Aquinas, and then there was, give me a minute. See, Rene Descartes? No, that's not who. Okay, I am drawing a complete blank, and this is kind of embarrassing. No, not really. Okay, so St. Augustine. Oh, thank God. Okay, all right. Okay, so before there was religion, there was philosophy. All right. Now, what was happening was this: philosophy was laying it out, like how human beings can achieve happiness. That's what philosophy is basically all about. It's about the heart, and it's about finding happiness. And philosophy, all the philosophers basically say, if you are of strong moral character, your life will be good. No one will have anything against you. Your name will be respected. That's basically the outline for philosophy. But Aristotle was the one that put a name on it, right? Like he just laid it all out in his books. And how you should act from a moral standpoint, he outlined it in these series of books called Nicomachean Ethics. And when I was studying more on Aristotle, I stumbled across Nicomachean Ethics, specifically Book 3. By the way, Aristotle named these books after his son, Nico. Nico is Machian? I forget the name of his son, but Nicomachean Ethics came from his son's name. He named it after his son. And the third book talks about actions and consequences. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can give my students a moral lesson without using religion. And that's what I was doing. I was taking all these philosophers. So one of my favorite ones, so I was covering John Locke. I even have it like these were all the ones, all the philosophers that I covered when I was teaching my classes. So you could see Aristotle right there. I didn't touch Plato. I didn't really care for Plato, only because he was a bit of a snob. Plato was, and he believed that only the learned should argue and discuss points. because he felt like the little people weren't smart enough. But Aristotle was the one that say, no, anybody can have a discussion, anybody can have an argument, but this is how you should have the argument. And that's what Aristotle did. And we use that form of argument today in court of law with lawyers, even though they have a tendency to forget about what it actually takes to defend a person. They've forgotten how to actually get evidence. But okay, I digress. Woosah. So Aristotle, David Hume, yeah, I didn't get too much into David Hume though. Yeah, I didn't cover David Hume. St. Thomas Aquinas, absolutely, because St. Thomas Aquinas was the one that took philosophy and put some religious stank on it. Yes, yes, that was St. Thomas Aquinas, and then St. Augustine sort of drove it home. But St. Thomas Aquinas was the one, he was going over previous religious he was looking through previous philosophies, like from Cicero and Aristotle and all of them. And one that St. Thomas Aquinas read specifically, he sort of incorporated what Cicero wrote. And from that, we have the 7 deadly sins. Yes, that came from Cicero. That came from philosophy, the 7 deadly sins. So we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Immanuel Kant right here, right? And then I did John Locke. Dope. John Locke is dope. John Locke is dope. I won't get into John Locke. All right. So here's Thomas Hobbes, right? Then with discussion on free will. I liked author Schopenhauer, but I couldn't find a way to use him. Avicenna or Ibn Sina, yes, he was Islamic philosopher from the golden age of when the Moors were in Spain. And yeah, just very, like, the fact that he came up with this after reading Aristotle and all of the great philosophers, because the golden age of Islam in southern Spain, part of that was they brought back all of these ancient philosophies and texts, and they opened them up and they studied them and started to discuss them among themselves. Avicenna and that whole golden age of Islam brought back these philosophers. Otherwise, they probably would have been lost forever. So we can thank Avicenna or Ibicena for that. So, and then my all-time favorite philosopher is Baruch Spinoza. Now, the reason why I like Spinoza, or I actually in love with Spinoza, is because Spinoza was considered a rabble rouser. He was considered the atheist Jew, but he wasn't an atheist because an atheist an atheist doesn't pretend, excuse me. An atheist does not believe in the existence of a God. That's not the case with Spinoza. Spinoza did believe in the existence of a God or a higher power or whatever you want to call it. But he says, and this is why I love Spinoza so much, Spinoza says that we look at God as a human being. We I can't say the word, anthropomorphize, there we go, God, and we make him vengeful. Now, understand that he was a Jew. He was basically going against his own scripture by saying this, which is why he was basically kicked out he was kicked out from countries because they thought that he was speaking against God, but he wasn't. What he was doing was he was saying, we need to stop looking at God as a vengeful person, and we need to look at God from a different perspective or different angle. God is not a vengeful, I am tripping over my tongue. God is not a vengeful, petty being that punishes us when we do something wrong. That's not what God is. He says, he believes that God is all around us. We can see it. Whenever we step outside our door, we see the trees bend and sway. That's God. When we see water, body of water, just gently just floating, waves, 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 that's God. God is everywhere. It's in the trees. It's in the flowers. It is even in us. We are a part of this universe that God has created. But people, when Spinoza was talking about this, people thought that he was saying that we are God when he says that we are a part of God. That's not what he's saying. We have to understand that just like animals that interact and live with each other, we are animals just like they are. And we interact with them, they interact with us, and we are all modes. We are God's thoughts expressed in bodily form. So the modes are the trees, the flowers, the plants, the birds, the bugs, all reptiles, all of the animal species, including us. We are all a part of God because God thought of us, God created us, and we are a part of that world that he created. Therefore, we are a part of God and God is a part of us. Radical concept, right? And therefore, Spinoza says, we do not need to ask for God's forgiveness. We do not have to pray to end suffering because God does not do that. God is not in the sky like this puppet, basically guiding our lives or putting it in a certain direction. That's not what God is about. God is about existing. That's it. God is about existing. It's all around us. Every time you see a flower, that's a thought from God. We are a thought from God. Therefore, we are a part of God. And when you think of it that way, it's like, why do I need religion again? You know? So now, there are philosophies that come out of Eastern or from the East. I talked about I have learned about I know about Taoism. If you saw that episode, the Tao of Pooh, or the Tao of Pooh, or the Tao of Who, that episode a while back, when I talk about Taoism, and I talked about how a student introduced me to Taoism. But along with Confucianism and Buddhism and Hinduism, and there's another. It's not a religion. It's not a philosophy, but it is a philosophy. And when I heard about it, and actually I came across this manual philosophy through a History Channel special. I've really missed the History Channel. I haven't watched it in a long time because I stream everything. But The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Yes. This is a philosophy that's about battle. Okay. But I argue that this philosophy can be used in everyday life, especially if you're up against an enemy. And I have studied the art of war, and I find it endlessly fascinating. And I find some of the stratagems that are outlined by Sun Tzu to be credible and applicable in certain instances of your life, especially for fighting a power. The art of war will teach you how to do it smoothly. It is believed that the Viet Cong, Ho Chi Minh, studied the art of war. Because if you look at from the time um, when the Vietnam War, if I remember correctly, really started like in the 50s with French Indochina withdrawing and leaving Vietnam vulnerable to Russian and China influences. Wow. I just opened up a rusty drawer in my brain by saying all of that. So, what was I saying? I lost my train of thought again. Son of a biscuit. I lost my train of thought. I hate when that happens. Oh my days. I'm just now looking at how long I've been talking. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up. So with the art of war, it's more or less like understanding your opponent, understanding the psychology of your opponent, and using that psychology against them. All right. And so whenever you're up against a foe and you have to fight the power, I do recommend that you read The Art of War. I remember now, Ho Chi Minh, at the beginning of the Vietnam War, which really started in the 50s when France withdrew because they basically invaded Vietnam, took it over, and then withdrew, which is why some of their cuisine have French baguettes because of French influences when they occupied Vietnam. But they pulled out, left it basically rudderless, and that left it open to a lot of people kind of interested, including communist countries like Russia and China, because where Vietnam is strategically placed, and the belief was, which is why the U.S. decided to get into the Vietnam War, is that if Vietnam falls to communism, all of Southeast Asia will fall to communism, and it will only spread even further. So the idea was to stop communism in its tracks in Vietnam, hence the Vietnam War. Now, Ho Chi Minh, it's been believed that he studied the art of war extensively and used some of the practices that are outlined in this philosophy during the Vietnam War, like the tunnels. That was something that is in the art of war. Um, uh, a lot of the strategies that was used by Ho Chi Minh, you can find a lot of them mimicked in the art of war. All right. So that is, and then of course I'm not going to mention this book too much, but I got this book. See, I don't lie. I'm not a liar. I found this, and this one is pretty cool. This book is pretty cool. It just briefly talks about all of the philosophers. You know, it really doesn't get too much into it. I liked it because it introduces other philosophers that I have not heard of. You know, here's good old St. Thomas Aquinas, right? So, yeah, so these are my books that basically brought enlightenment to me. This is Philosophy 101 by Paul Kleinman. And this is not all that expensive. And it gives a very nice overview of some of the heavy hitters in philosophy. And it's a nice jumping off point, to do your own investigations into these philosophers. One source that I recommend is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's free, but if you want to download the PDF articles, they recommend that you just, make a donation, a regular donation, and you can download their articles. But I found that once I got a teaser from this book, I would go to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where they have more extensive articles written by former students and faculty. And also MIT, they have a philosophy department, and they have a lot. I don't know, it's been a minute since I've been on that website, but MIT has a philosophy department, and they put a lot of ancient philosophies on there. Some they translated. As a matter of fact, I used their translation of Nicomachean Ethics, Book 3, so that I could teach it to my students. It was horribly transcribed, and it took me forever to try and break it down, but once I got it, I got it. Right. So here's this one book that, if you're interested and you just want to get a teaser of philosophers without really going deep into it, this is the book for you. If you want to learn more about Buddhism, this is an excellent book. I cannot recommend it enough. The Heart of Buddha's Teachings by Thich Nhat Hanh. All right, this comes highly recommended. It will sort of, it helped me quite a bit, because there are times when I was really suffering. And what this does is it allows you to self-diagnose yourself. That's basically what Buddhism does. It allows you to self-diagnose yourself, find the suffering, stamp out the suffering, and then do these practices on a regular basis. Do the practices on a regular basis. Oh, good, no burping. And if you do that, you will minimize or eventually eliminate your suffering, and you will have a wonderful life. The Bhagavad Gita, which is not outlining Hinduism. I want to make that perfectly clear. This amplifies the lessons of Hinduism through this epic poem. Okay, that's what this is. The Bhagavad Gita basically is sort of like a huge example of all the different practices of Hinduism, and it explains it in this poem. That's what it is. I do recommend it. Do I have any books about Hinduism that I can recommend? No. All the information that I got on Hinduism was from various websites, because I have yet to see a book, and maybe it's out there, I don't know, but I have yet to see a book that actually, probably Hinduism for Dummies. I don't know what, that just popped into my head. There's probably a book, Hinduism for Dummies, that could explain it, but that's how I I was curious. I got curious. And then, of course, Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Again, this is a philosophy, it's a strategy, and it works when you want to fight the power. Okay. All right. So, wow, this was longer than I had intended it to be. But, it's been a while since I sat in front of you. So, forgive me for being so like a chatty Cathy with this episode, right? So, all right. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Um, will I be back on track with these episodes? I don't know. But no, I will, only because, oh, I put my books away. As I was moving books around, I found a bunch of books that I do want to introduce to you. And they're like another aspect of writing that I really, really love. And if I could make money from it, I would. But I won't talk about it for now. I'm going to save that for the next episode. All right. So, it's a crazy world out there. The minute you step out your door, something can happen. But I'm going to recite my new mantra, if you remember it correctly, and I even have it here in front of me. All is well. Everything is working for my highest good. Out of this situation, only good will come. I am safe. See you next time. Bye.